What's up, everyone? This is Jose Nino here with another fantastic episode of El Nino Speaks. And we're back with the usual programming. And tonight I'm joined by Zach of Logos Revealed. How are you, man?
I'm good, brother. I appreciate the invite. It's a pleasure to be on and have a discussion with you.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed participating in the panel for Red Ice on New Year's Eve. I found the entire experience to be rather enlightening. But before we start diving into some of like the more like heated issues, give my audience a brief overview of like your work and what you do these days.
Yeah, so likewise, I agree. Red Ice was a really nice chat. Wonderful people over there. So I'm Zach. I go by Logos Revealed online. I run a show on Odyssey, Rumble, Twitter, basically any of the platforms that will allow our kind of discussions on them. And I talk about culture, philosophy, politics. Obviously, when you discuss these things, you have to go into the Jewish problem, which in the modern age is a really big aspect for a lot of these things and the breakdown that we see of a lot of these aspects of society. So I talk about that quite frequently as well. You can find all of my channels, Logos Revealed, Logos Revealed I in some cases if Logos Revealed was taken. But for the most part, it's Logos Revealed. And I try to basically wake up younger individuals is my main aim, but I also basically try to go to anybody that's willing to hear these ideas out and try to wake them up to an understanding of what the concept of the West actually is, historically and culturally, not this modern concept of it. So that's a broad gist of what I try to do.
The so-called Jewish problem is one of the more interesting political subjects of our epoch, and I've noticed over the last decade or so that a ton of people are getting hip to the concept. And in your case, how did you start noticing, if you will?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So I have a very interesting process that is maybe a little different than most people. Most people, they had like, a rabbit hole they were already in beforehand or something like that. So I during this COVID era, so I'm pretty young. I'm only 26 yet. And during COVID, I was experiencing the, psychological effects of all of these people around me going crazy and getting this vaccination, as they call it, right? And all this stuff. And I was, I'm looking at it from a very logical perspective and just saying, what the hell are these people? What is happening? And it became very clear to me that our government was not actually representing the people that they claim to represent. That was very clear to me. And I started trying to do some research, and you go through a couple of rabbit holes on BitChute about the Illuminati and the Freemasons, right? The New World Order agenda and these things, the Alex Jones type of camp, right?
Yeah, the cognitive pollution.
Yes, right. The pressure valve for society, and I had somebody pretty close to me say, and the funny thing is they were actually joking when they said this, and they said, it's the Jews, right? and I, at this point, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I don't really know what a Jew is. I don't really know anything about Jews, biologically, ideologically. I don't know anything about these people. So in my head, I'm saying, okay, what does that mean? I don't even know where to kind of start with that. So I wanted to dig deeper into this, and I thought to myself, okay, someone's telling me that Jews are the cause of all of this. I don't know if I necessarily believe that, but I've been told my whole life that someone who blamed everything on the Jews was Adolf Hitler. So let me see what that guy had to say. I'm just curious. So I picked up a copy of Mein Kampf. I went with the Stalag edition because I wanted to make sure that I was reading an authentic version of the book and not some, heavily annotated or heavily edited version, right? And I'll tell you, the book just completely enamored me. I read it front to back. I was just infatuated. Everything I read, I couldn't agree with more. And that was my start. And, I was at the same time I was reading, like European philosophy, reading into like the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans and things like that. And after reading this book, it just kind of really came to me that this is the problem. Clearly, these people are the catalyst for a lot of what we have going on. And obviously, that wasn't an easy process to come to that. I didn't just read Mein Kampf and decide that. I did my own research, and again, the good old classic trope of like every single time, right? It really is. Every time you look into what's causing problems in society, you find the same people behind every damn door, and eventually you have to accept that this is the problem.
That is really intriguing because you mentioned COVID, and I think people don't really appreciate not just like the really like totalitarian nature of like these lockdowns and all of that, and these policies that displace people's lives, but also it that period gave a lot of people idle time to be like at home researching a ton of stuff, and tons of people I noticed got very radicalized. Even myself, to be honest, because I've known about this stuff about like the JQ, at least like in a casual way, but it was during COVID as well when I had a lot more time. Especially, I've been working online for some time before that. I have much more time to look into this stuff, and at that point, there's been no going back. Like I put out content like unabashedly on the issue. So for your channel, Logos Revealed, were you originally on like YouTube and traditional big tech, or did you just go straight into alt tech?
Yeah, I started right on the alternative platforms, and basically I came across some of these other, we'll say more radical elements in our ideological scene who are more flamboyant with their messaging and things like that. And I was watching them, and I thought to myself, okay, I appreciate that they're spreading the message, but where's the intellectual approach? That's kind of my thing. Is I grew up all my life not hearing about this problem. I'm very upset that no one told me that this problem is a thing. So I think more people need to be educated on this, right? I mean, like I have family members who are in their 60s, 70s, 40s who have never heard of this. Not once has it ever crossed their plate to look into this stuff. And that kind of made me think, somebody needs to try to teach these people as best they can. And I have actually a background from doing live streams. In my youth, I played video games, and I used to live stream video games, right? And I did that for a lot of years, actually, as a living for quite a while.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah, so I basically already had the technological equipment and the know-how on how to do something like this. So I decided, all right, well, why not take my political ideals that I strongly believe in, and I think more people need to know about, and spread them in the only way that I know how. So yeah, I went straight to the alternative platforms because I was on Twitch for a lot of years, and they started kind of cranking down on language. You have to be very careful about what you say and things like that. So I ended up voluntarily removing myself from there, and it was about, I would say, maybe 2 or 3 years later that I started on alternative platforms and actually doing politics as a serious thing.
Man, that point you mentioned about video games is rather intriguing because I haven't played like PC games or any of that stuff since like at least like religiously since 2012. But I've noticed a pipeline of pretty hardcore gamers becoming noticers. Have you witnessed that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a really interesting aspect here psychologically, because when I was in that scene playing video games with a lot of these people, there was a lot of, it's hard to describe. I guess you could call it like high testosterone kind of behavior, right? Like men were just at each other's throats. They were always kind of jumping on top of each other, shit talking, all those things you see in video games. And it kind of creates like a backbone in people quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Something that I think, if you're not in the gaming sphere or something in that realm, you really where are you going to get that? You know, in society today, the whole agenda is to try to take modern man and make him as effeminate as possible, try to break down all of that masculine tendency. And I feel like in those gaming spheres, there was a lot of that. Some of it, you know, to a really egregious extent, and that's actually been, you know, corrupted quite a bit as well
Oh
through.
yeah, yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah,
You know, yeah, it's been corporatized, right? They've just basically bought out all of these major gaming companies, and now you can't even call somebody gay online, or you get banned off the game for
yeah.
suspension.
Yeah, that reminds me too, like, and I'm gonna date myself here, but like one of like the more masculine, like, formative type of activities I was doing was like hanging out with like a lot of my Korean friends, like playing Counter Strike and other stuff like at LAN parties or in like so-called PC bongs, like those Korean internet cafes. And that it was super politically incorrect. We let like all sorts of like slurs fly and all that, and it was always fun. But and if looking back at my gamer profile though, I was more of an RTS like RPG guy, and that's because I come from like a history background, so I love like anything like medieval Total War and like Rome Total War, and this segues into another point. I actually agree with you that in most of the noticing spaces and just talking about like the JQ or whatever, there is a dearth of intellectual content that's like is like highbrow that looks at historical trends and studies this stuff like as like almost like a science or like historical discipline. Because my background was in focusing a lot on like East Asian and like Latin American history and comparative government when I was in the university. And it's funny because most of my work continues to be the same along the same lines, more or less, when I do my political analysis, because most history majors I've encountered in the past, they tend to just do jobs completely unrelated to their field. But I've been able to cobble together a very unconventional career in that respect, and it's good to see that there are other people like yourself, Zach, that are doing this kind of stuff because there was actually once of previous noticers too, very high level noticers that came from rigorous academic backgrounds, and they picked up on a lot of the trends of organized Jewry throughout their time in Europe. What so in terms of like the eras that you cover, what are like your favorite historical eras to study?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I like I like the ancient world a lot. I like looking
Mhm.
at ancient Greece, ancient Rome. I find these to be two incredibly foundational civilizations to what we have today. You know, just how our societies are formed today, philosophically, politically. A lot of this comes from those civilizations and what the men laid out then. I also have a fascination with World War II and, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
actual the Third Reich. You know, as a philosophical body, politically, socially, all of the things that they laid out. I find that to be a very unique and fascinating ideology that just is unparalleled by anything else that I seem to research. I would say those are probably the three main things that I really like to look into. I'm not like theological at all. I'm more in the historical realm. So that's probably the main three for me.
Yeah, going back to the classics is always a good way to have like to build like a strong foundation of understanding politics as it plays out in the present. I think that if you don't really understand the wisdom of like the ancients, you won't really have a strong foundation. Whether you look at like history or comment on present day politics, based on what you've covered in like Greek and Roman history, were there any significant noticers of those epochs that really struck out to you that exposed organized Jewry's shenanigans in those time periods?
Yeah, there was actually. a few that stood out very interestingly. So one, we don't have the actual literature that he wrote. We have parcels of it from the Jewish scholar Josephus, right?
Yeah, Josephus. Yeah.
So Appian, he wrote against a treatise called "Against the Jews," and that's kind of broadly quoted from Josephus. I think he lays out some pretty interesting things. I really like Tacticus in his histories, where he lays out the Jewish people. He lays out their historical foundation, and then he also lays out who they are and what they're kind of doing. And it's hilarious because basically what he lays out is what all of medieval Europe warned us about these same people for thousands of years, as well as Cicero in his final case where he's on trial, and he basically states that these Jews have this financial power over top of him, and that he does not want to contest their power. Essentially, he wants to speak out against it, but he also feels that he's in a tough spot to do so. So, yeah, those are some interesting cases. And I actually I wrote a thread on Twitter about this exact topic, and I stated I titled the thread, "What did the ancient Romans think about the Jewish people, and would they consider Israel our greatest ally?" And I kind of went into yeah, right. Of course not. So I went into the history of kind of what those people had to say about them, and it's fascinating to research. What your ancestors laid out about this.
Do you this may be outside of your wheelhouse? Are you familiar with the historical interactions of like the Persians and the Jews? Or is that something you've covered? Or
to a slight regard, yeah. I'm not very in depth on this. Like I'm familiar with what's laid out in the Book of Esther, where essentially these Jews came in, they subverted the kingdom by marrying into the royalty. They got themselves in, and they hung Haman on the practices that they do today with Purim, or recitations of this awful atrocity of them. Yeah, so that's probably the most of my knowledge on that.
Yeah, that is like also the same, because the Book of Esther is almost like, when you look at it broad based, value free. It is essentially like a murder conspiracy, if you will, and a form of it is like the Machiavelli for the Jews in a way, because of how like they just like essentially just use pure guile, subterfuge, and deceit to commit like this like heinous act, and it's celebrated, which makes it even more morbid. Yeah, so with respect to the Greeks, what have you gotten in depth as far as the interactions they had as well with organized Jewry at the time, or is the documentation of that epoch a lot harder to find than the Romans?
It seems to be unfortunately much more difficult to research, specifically that piece. I've tried to look. I haven't found anything extra insightful. Not that I know of, at least. If there is something, I would certainly love to research it. But as far as I know, Appian is probably the best source, and it's not even a direct source, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense, because a lot of history, like, let's face it, oftentimes it's actually an ongoing process where new evidence will come up, maybe like 100 years later. So it's a constant process of trying to like sift through documents that are that turn up all of a sudden, or somebody just scours through, like, say, like a library or some like abandoned area. But that's basically what I more or less suspected. Now let's shift our focus over to like more contemporary stuff, especially October 7th in the aftermath of that, because that has been basically the largest murder ritual, if you will, of the 21st century that we have seen. Basically, a child sacrifice ritual, if you want to be honest, given Israel's like deliberate targeting of like civilians. What was it your impression of like October 7th and like the aftermath of that?
Yeah, I think well, for starters, if you're well researched on the history of the Jews, as we discussed with Persia, it's not a surprising event. So I wasn't shell shocked when I saw that. I wasn't thrown back and oh my god, I can't believe they did that. It's quite expected of these people if you've done enough research into their history and how they behave. Unfortunately. I think it's a big event, something that we really need to capitalize on, especially in our ideological realm, because there, as we both know, there's a lot of people that don't know about this issue. They're not very up to date on what a Jew is and how these people have basically been towards our society for years. So this is a really good event to showcase to the modern public and show them, look, this is what we're dealing with here. This is a very serious problem. And these people do not think like you and I. And so I think the events of October 7th are, again, they're not a surprise, but it is something that we can definitely use to display exactly what we're trying to talk about when we discuss these people. We got to get away from this blaming it on Israel or the Zionists or these kind of like obfuscations that you get from the conservative party that draw away from the actual problem. Right? This is a Jewish problem in its essence. Israel is a product of that. Right? Zionism is a product of that.
Yeah, its expression. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, go into that more. How do you see people obfuscate that? Because I've noticed it among the left, like the typical pro-Palestinian left will even blame like white people. So yeah, just go off on the obfuscation.
Yeah, well, this is a really important one because this is first off, this is intentional. This is so what Jews will do is whenever something is getting exposed that they've done or that they are doing, they try to jump in and be the ones that control the public discussion of it. And they create the framework from which you can speak in, right? So now you literally have like pro-Palestine leftists that are saying, fuck Israel, down with Israel, free Palestine. But then in the same breath, they're saying that, you shouldn't be anti-Semitic. Don't call them Jews, call them Zionists. Because if you say Jews, it's anti-Semitic. And it's like, look, this is a psychological trap for these people where they're trying to now train them that the actions of Israel are actually, this is just another piece of white supremacy, expressing itself, colonial white supremacy, trying to take over some brown countries. And unfortunately, the left is buying into this very heavily, and they're misunderstanding or failing to recognize that, we use this term Zionism, right, as the catalyst or the problem for what we're seeing right now. But Zionism wasn't a thing when these people were kicked out of 109 countries.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't a thing. It didn't exist. Mm-hmm. Zionism wasn't a thing, when ancient Rome was writing about these people, wearing the entrails of their enemies and things like that. Zionism didn't exist back then. So Zionism is merely a creation of this group, this people.
It's an expression. Yeah,
exactly. It's an expression of their psychological character that's pushing itself out as a political movement. And this is the same thing that people do in our country today. This is a very common problem where, these conservatives will say, "Oh, it's the radical left, it's the Democrats." So yet again, they're blaming like a political entity rather than the actual source of the problem. It's not just the Democrats. It's who's running that party, who is financing things.
Yep. It's like not like say what you will about the communists or like the Bolsheviks. They said it correctly. It's who whom. That's like the question that is like the ultimate question in politics of how to know who your enemy is and how to like actually operate in a functional level. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely. If you don't look at the source of the problem, you'll never fix the problem. You know, it's like you've got stage 4 lung cancer, right? And because your lungs are all blackened, you have a cough, and someone keeps saying, "Oh, those damn coughs, they're terrible, they're killing us." Well, no, it's not the cough that's killing you; it's the lung cancer that's killing you. So you don't look at the symptom, you look at the source, and that's how you fix the illness, right? And this is the problem with our political discourse today is no one has the confidence to point to the source because they're afraid of that social backlash that's ever present, you know, everywhere you go.
Oh yes. I actually think I noticed something in one of your posts on X as well, where you were talking about that, like the obfuscation, because what I've noticed in because I've been involved in the anti-war dissident foreign policy scene for some time. You'll have people saying like, "Oh, it's just the Zionist Jews, it's just these European Jews." You know what's funny is if you actually look at Israeli politics now, the most like unhinged, like violent and radical like elements of that government. They're not the Ashkenazi Jews. They're like the Middle Eastern Mizrahi Jews that come from like Iraq, like Iran, and other parts of like the Middle East and North Africa. And even like some of them are like actually quite brown. So like this whole brown white thing, settler colonialism thing doesn't work. And in fact, this is one trick I've noticed some of like the more like Zionist Jews will play because they know how to cater to every audience. They'll always say like, "Oh, Israel's like the greatest anti-colonial experiment because we kicked the British out of like mandatory Palestine." They'll play that card too, and that's why you can't play into their frame like that. You have to like start like going back to basics and identify the root of this problem.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And this is again, it's very heavily controlled in a manner in which no one feels comfortable going to the source because they don't want to be called hateful or anti-Semitic or be perceived as not wise, right? And this is another piece is because people don't have the education on the Jewish problem and Jews throughout history, which, by the way, you can't have that unless you are an independent researcher and spend hours and hours and hours looking into this problem. It's not something that's just like put on your plate in front of you and, oh, there it is. Like, here's how it works. Now you know, right? You have to really research this very seriously. So that lack of understanding is also another reasoning that people don't speak out against it because, if you only know 4 or 5 little details about this problem, you're not exactly going to feel comfortable speaking out against it, right? Because you're going to look dumb if someone comes and combats your view and you don't really have anything to say to it. I think that's another aspect that's pretty major in people being so weary about what they say on this topic.
I think this ties into your history focus as well, because when you only know 4 or 5 aspects of like generic, like noticing anti-Semitism, whatever you want to call it, you fall into the cartoon anti-Semite frame where you almost become like a caricature of that. And sometimes these type of people, they can easily be propped up by Jewish gatekeeping institutions because they say, "Hey, look, this guy's a moron who can't even like talk about this cogently." But when you actually like understand like the full blown history, all the way from the ancients to like their strategies in the present, that's when you become much more potent. And I've noticed this too as well, that because I come from like more of a conventional political background, is that organized Jewry has like burrowed into like almost every political movement imaginable. It's not just like a left thing or a right thing. Even like the populist movement too. Because I wrote a recent post for the Occidental Observer where I pointed out how like the so-called national conservatism movement that's being propped up on the right, that's just like a pure like Israeli nationalist op. And it's just like and you see this all the time also on the left where you have these groups that are cognitively polluted with like Jewish interest groups as well that do the same thing, and it creates that so-called kosher sandwich dynamic. And I just wanted to ask, did you have like a MAGA phase or any type of conventional political phase when you were becoming more savvy on the JQ, or were you just like straight up JQ focused?
I was straight in. Again, my jumping into politics was really through reading Mein Kampf, which is,
Hmm.
it's so lucky when you look at it from a hind's eye view or hindsight. I'm very fortunate that I started in that route, because if I didn't, a lot of people do. They get infatuated with Donald Trump as our savior, and they fall into all these little like pitfalls that just won't go anywhere. Right? They're just illogical.
Detour, yeah.
Yeah, and I was very fortunate to not fall into one of those things. I wasn't ever a serious Alex Jones viewer or anything like that, because he's really good at drawing people away.
Yeah, guilty in that respect. Like that's how I actually kind of got into politics. But what's funny is that there was one point in his career that he was like Israeli skeptic, but he eventually got flipped because the problem is when you have a really weak type of like cognitive polluted background, when you don't have like that proper education, your whole career is centered around getting clicks and short-term outrage, you're just going to inevitably become a Sanhedrin slave. Like that's just like the long and the short of it. And I've seen many people that have gone through that. And in your journey, did you ever encounter a lot of pushback from people that were like in your like immediate social circle and other people that you interacted with?
Not much. I did experience a very small amount, but for the most part, no. I've been very fortunate in that regard. I guess I never really surrounded myself that were, like liberal leaning kind of. We can't hurt people's feelings. That kind of a mentality. I never really surrounded myself with people like that. So I think that's a factor in the fact that I never really experienced any serious backlash. Only one family member, and they were actually somebody that briefly dated a Jewish woman who lived in New York City. So that's why it was so cognitively dissonant for them to ever think that Jews could be bad somehow. Right? It's very ingrained into their mind.
Yes, I have also like really filtered out a ton of people from my social circle. I don't, mine is actually quite small now too. I would have said before in like my political journey from like '07 to I'd say like October like 7th, 2023, just like that time frame. I felt that I would get much more pushback for a lot of my politically incorrect beliefs that were tangentially close to anything related to the JQ noticing and all that. But I think after October 7th, funny enough, you can't really be censored that much like as like before. Like you will get censored, but it's not as damaging, I feel like, because there's so much critical mass and just noticing in general that I think now hilariously organized Jewry, they're falling back to the tactic of propping up like cartoon anti-Semites or like really low IQ types that kind of discredit it, but they can't really rely on that hard power like they could do before, because back then you could get like completely destroyed professionally and all of that, but now that's kind of changed to a degree. There's still people that obviously will face censorship, like especially on Elon Musk's Twitter through demonetization. But it's not like the lethal kill shot like it was like a decade ago.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's a very good aspect too. Is the more people start to wake up to this, the more comfortable it becomes societally to discuss it, right? And as that happens, you know, it's cliche, but the truth is on our side with this problem, right? I mean, it really is. All you have to do is a couple hours of research, genuinely observing what we have to say. It becomes very clear that we're not wrong. If I was, if I wasn't so sure in myself, I wouldn't be dedicating myself to this and throwing my face out there and discussing this topic every day. The only reason I do that is because I spent years double checking myself on this problem. I went through the whole, psychological thing. Even Hitler lays it out himself in Mein Kampf. He says, he states he was never anti-Semitic. He grew up cosmopolitan, and he kind of went through this process of realizing how many Jews were behind Marxism and the destruction of Germany, and this hatred against what it means to be a German. And he says, I basically, my sentiments didn't want to be quote unquote anti-Semitic, but reason had to overcome sentiment at some point. And that's basically the same conclusion that I came to is, in my heart of hearts, I don't want to be, ruthless against one group of people, but I mean, they give you all of the reasons to at this point.
Does that explain your creator name Logos partially?
Yeah, well, so my that is taken actually from the ancient Greek concept of logos, right? Because I know a lot of times it gets wrapped in Christian theology, the logos. So I took it from the Greek logos, ethos, and pathos as the logical route. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when you understand history and pattern recognition, you eventually reach these type of conclusions. But whenever you let your emotions really get the best of you, you get caught up in the day-to-day political outrage. That's when you start losing brain cells, and this goes straight to the contemporary right now. What do you make of the first few days of Trump being in office?
Yeah, it's hard to say when it comes to Trump. I fear him being in office. I think it's actually a very bad thing for us. I think a lot of people that we need to start becoming radicalized politically are actually going to be lulled back to sleep by Donald Trump being in power. It feels nice and comfortable. We've got normalcy back in the White House, right? And I think that's a very dangerous thing. I really don't like that. So I'm worrisome about him being there. Now, granted, I see he did the whole, freeing the January Sixers and all these other, smaller aspects and whatnot. But I don't give him the same leeway that I think a lot of people do. You'll never really see him advocating openly for the white peoples of America who founded
the state forming people.
Yeah, who literally are his main voter base. He has no problem going on stage and pandering to blacks and Muslims and Indians and all these other people, but he'll never pander to the literal people that founded this country, gave him this thing that he has, and who voted him into power by majority. Right, it was mostly white people on behalf of him.
In what ways do you think a Trump presidency will lull people to sleep?
So I think it puts them back in a state of comfort with bread and circus, right? So, the average person that's getting upset with society today, they only get upset with the really radical aspects of it. They only get upset with the transgenderism and things of the sort. I know conservatives personally who, mind you, being a conservative 30 years ago meant you were against gay marriage. But I know I know conservatives now who will say, "Oh yeah, I don't like the transgenderism. But there are some good gays that vote for Trump, and they're against the transgenderism. Those are the normal gays, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what? There is no normal gay. Like, why are we playing this game? Why are we giving
Yeah.
these people all of this lead? It's absurd, right? So what I worry is when with Trump being in power, these people will think, oh, because a lot of people look at politics like they look at football. My team
Oh,
won.
yeah.
My team
Yeah.
won, and that's all that matters. We got Trump in, we won, right? And they're having their victory laps and stuff, and it puts them back in that comfort zone. They can live the bread and circus again. They feel happy and safe, and that to me is incredibly dangerous. I think our people falling back asleep in this time is one of the worst things that can happen for us. So that is the main reason that I'm against Trump being in not against it, that I'm worried about it.
I'm the same way. I voted for Trump twice before, but this recent election, I did not participate at all. Like this was like the first presidential election cycle I did not like vote in whatsoever, because after just doing lots of writing and just researching over the years, I just came to the conclusion, and this system that we have in Empire Judaica, you're just not going to get like far with like conventional political options, and that's why I just said like screw it. And I actually do share the same view as you do, man, because the way I look at conservatives, they are like a pressure release valve. You can't really look at these things through like an ideologically reductionist lens or through like public policy lens. You have to look at it more from like the way the power system interacts, where oftentimes a lot of these so-called great leap forwards, whether it's on like the distortion of like sexual relations or immigration, they're often engineered by the so-called like liberals and all this, but they're ultimately consolidated by the conservative parties. Because conservative parties, when you understand how they function as an institution to prevent the rise of a serious nationalist movement that is going to preserve like the founding stock of like what European nation is being afflicted by these maladies that organized Jewry has unleashed on them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a heavily overused term, but the term gatekeeper is very solid
Yes.
in regards to these people, because it absolutely is their role. They are gatekeepers who are doing everything they can to allow these Jews to remain in power and continue to function, untampered or unhampered rather, by any outside influences. It's sickening. I mean, these people are bona fide traitors. They really are.
Oh yeah, big time. Also, I think too when one of the flaws with like the liberal versus conservative dichotomy, or even like right versus left dichotomy, is we are seeing a breakdown of the so-called liberal order, if you will, where a lot of these party structures, they're falling apart and they're being replaced by like so-called populist or democratic socialists or other like hardcore leftist parties. But the same superstructure that has like the consortium of Jewish groups that control like the whole like political structure, it stays intact. So they just burrow into these new entities that form. And if you don't understand what the score is, you're just gonna end up getting duped when you think like the political system is changing when it actually isn't. It's just that the actors, the aesthetics change, but the underlying substance stays the same.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And even this whole the two party system, right? You see the same issue kind of extrapolate itself in the framework of the two party system, because you'll have a lot of people that will be a diehard Democrat all their life, and then all of a sudden they'll swap sides, and they only really do it because they want to save face, right? Or they want to seem more whatever party is more acceptable at the time.
Yeah.
That's the one that they want to follow suit with. It really has nothing to do with actual ideology or where you stand, like what your convictional line is on this or that topic. It's more about saving face for, public sentiment or something like that.
Yeah, it's very transactional. That's the one problem too with the current political order, is that when you live in a deracinated society that's based on like economic like reductionist logic, which you could thank the tribe for that. You don't see things from an identity lens, whether you take a certain political action to preserve your lineage, to preserve the state forming people of your polity. Instead, you're doing things to like say, oh, this will, if I vote for this guy, he'll give me like a tax cut so that I can like throw my money at the stock market or something like that. It's all like very hyper individualistic, consumerist, and transactional. It has nothing to do with like actual serious politics that deals with the preservation of a people.
Yeah, it's well said. It's very heavily driven by self-interest. Pretty much all aspects of voting in the modern age are driven by self-interest. People are thinking, well, how's this guy going to be for gas prices, or how is he going to be for my local job that I have? Is it going to be good for me financially? People are very much, especially on the right side, the conservative side, as they call it. It's always about economics. How is it going to benefit myself personally in this moment, rather than the grander scheme of, is this good for the whole of society? Does this help society as a collective? People don't really think on that scale.
Nope, they don't. And based on some of the tweets that I've seen from coming from you, I take it you're not the biggest fan of Elon Musk. You don't think he's going to be like the savior of our people.
No, not at all. I think a lot of people are misguided on the Elon Musk topic. Again, I understand it. There is this desire for, people want this system to actually work. They want to have hope and faith that this is actually somehow, they don't have to get up and spark revolution, and that like everything's just gonna fall into place for us. And these, don't worry, we've got these really based, wealthy people who they're gonna fix it. Just give them time. It's a lot of there's a big hope factor for a lot of these people, and I understand it, but it's hard. It's hard to watch our people being so easily duped by a guy who just has to say the right thing a couple times, and they're instantly fully on board with him.
Yeah, I want to talk about the whole Hale Gate, if you will, and how you said that Elon is not our guy based on a tweet that the ADL, the Anti Defamation League, put out in trying to defend him. Well, what do you make of that whole incident, and what does it like portend for the future of like the immediate future of like politics?
Yeah, I think it's a really important piece. When you look at this ADL tweet, and I quote tweeted it, they basically made a statement in defense of Elon Musk and said, oh, he wasn't throwing a Nazi salute. He was just simply making an awkward gesture, simple mistake. When does the ADL ever do that for anybody? Any chance they get, they want to tear somebody down. Even if the person actually isn't a anti-Semite, they want to do everything in their power to convince everyone around that they absolutely are. They're certainly an anti-Semite. So the fact alone that they are defending this guy, I think that in itself is very telling of his affiliation with them. They're very closely linked together.
Yes, the ADL too. I have noticed, and this goes to show how deep the subversion is. The ADL has actually been receiving more criticism over the last 8 years or so, especially the Trump era, from people on the right, like a lot of MAGA types and conventional right wing people. But as you will guess it's for the wrong reasons. It's like a leftist organization. They're like liberals, blah, blah, blah. When in reality, they're a Jewish supremacist organization through and through. And what do you think are like the biggest challenges going forward in terms of getting people to start using the more like correct frameworks in how they analyze politics and just like reality in general?
Well, I think people need to start actually looking at alternative politics, like third position politics. They need to lose this blind hope and trust that the system is going to save us. That's a really dangerous spot that we're in right now in our political scene. People are very infatuated with this current political system. Again, it's not even politics to them. It's sports. I'm this team, you're that team, and I want my team to win. We need to get them out of that mindset, which also means we need to get them out of the sports mindset. There's a lot of levels to this, but we need to start harnessing. I was actually talking about this on a space just the other evening. We need to start harnessing the propaganda aspect a little bit better on our end. This is what the National Socialist Germany did, and that's why they were able to get to power, because they used propaganda. They understood these methods that the Jews themselves use frequently, something that we need to start harnessing for ourselves.
Yeah, that's the challenge, in my opinion, because we now have the ideas, and that's the first step. And then, but the dissemination, that's when it becomes harder in the organization. And I like the point you mentioned about sports because for most people, yeah, their actions are actually other political actions. They're actually like depoliticizing themselves. And they don't even realize it. Whereas organized Jewry, they're playing politics in the sense that they're infiltrating every group, whether it's a right, left group, populist group, democratic, socialist, liberal, you name it. They're actually playing politics. They're oftentimes engaging like in pincer movements, rear guard actions, and stuff like that. Whereas people here, man, like the only like political action they really engage in is they pull the lever for whatever party, like fake regime approved party um is up for election on a given election cycle, and then like that's it. And like the only other activities they partake in is like maybe like talking smack or owning the libs on like social media, which freaking anybody can do. But like nobody wants to put in like the real work, like do the real research, get or much less like get out there and start organizing people IRL, or at least building stuff online that can disseminate high level information and tactics on how to like mobilize. But that is like the challenge of our time.
Yeah, well, and that's another piece where it goes right into that kind of like sports mentality, the whole owning the libs aspect. That's a really big problem where people like to just waste their. If you really think these liberals are so destructive to society, and you actually claim to hate them as much as you say that you do, wouldn't you actually want them to like not be a thing in society anymore? Wouldn't you want to remove them from political power instead of like
Yeah.
right? Like, sitting around making jokes about them all day. We used to send gay people to Alcatraz. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Like, this is we're sitting and we're actually entertaining gay people by giving their views some kind of value by even arguing with them. Why are we even arguing or wasting our time paying attention to this? Lay out our convictions, say why it's wrong and what we believe in, and move forward. Again, it's that sports ball. Oh, my team won, and I got to gloat and throw it in your face, kind of a thing. And again, these big Jewish accounts will do everything in their power to co-opt this event.
Libs of TikTok and wokeness, we're looking at you.
Yeah, the libs of TikTok is a really big one. And woke. There's plenty of them, right? They're everywhere. Libs of TikTok, I think, is the worst example.
Yeah, those are like a lot of those are a combination of Jays and Shavuos goy types that engage in the same type of behavior that's like designed to depoliticize people. I face a dynamic as well, dealing with a lot of like so-called like labor leftists or progressives that like during the height of BLM, they were like buying corporate shit that like had like BLM propaganda. I'm like, yo, like, what are you doing here? Like, you should be focusing more on like your pet issue of like restricting like corporate influence, or like trying to like focus on like stuff like immigration restriction that protects worker wages, as opposed to like wasting your time like virtue signaling on social media and buying pro BLM stuff from like the very corporations you claim to hate. Like what's going on here? And that's like the left side. That's like the other side of the coin of this like depoliticized behavior that ends up benefiting the system.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of levels to the subversion of people falling into these. Again, it's a different form of bread and circus, right? It's not necessarily watching the Hollywood movies and the television, but they're giving you, these political aspects in a like a sugar-coated, like entertainment kind of a thing. Instead of actually, this is a serious problem that's destroying our society. We now turn it into this thing that we like make jokes about and we're entertained by. And I have a family member who I visit frequently, and they watch Charlie Kirk like all the time. Okay.
Yeah. Oh God.
And this guy is like, the head of the snake when it comes to these kind of things.
Oh, Sanhedrin slave all the way.
Yeah. And when you watch this show, I'll just watch it in passing while I'm over at their house. And I'm always, critiquing it and watching how many fucking Jewish guests this guy has on his show, which is like every guest is Jewish on Charlie Kirk's show.
Yeah.
I don't know if he ends his shows with Shabbat Shalom on Fridays. Every Friday he ends his show and says Shabbat Shalom. So I'm watching this in passing, and all they do every day is just, the radical left, and they're literally doing like Joe Biden impressions on the television. It's like, dude, like this is so lowbrow. It's like Jewish comedy, right? Like, come, what are we doing?
Slop. Yeah, this is like slop.
Yeah, I hate it. We need serious political discourse on these issues ASAP.
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, all this talk about adults in the room and stuff like that. Like look who's talking, because when you hear these people just spew this drivel, like it's like, come on, it's time for like an actual adult conversation about like the issues of our time. Anyways, man, I think this is a good place to put a bookmark in this convo. But before we leave, man, let my audience know where they can follow your work.
Yeah, sure thing. And again, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it. This is a nice chat. So you can find my work. I have I run a show couple days a week. It fluctuates depending on my schedule. But it's on Odyssey. You can find me at Logos Revealed. There's an entire archive of all of my streams that I've done. You can also find on Twitter. I really recommend people follow me on Twitter. That's where I'm the most active. I'm just under 20,000 followers at this point on Twitter. It's Logos Revealed I on Twitter. And it's the exact same on Rumble as well. So you can find all of my work through those different channels. And I post pretty frequently on Twitter, and I'm posting a couple times a week on these streaming channels.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on. And to my audience, thank you for your attention as always. And with that, El Nino has spoken.